Good evening, everyone. Thank you. Good evening, and thanks for joining the Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee and the Department of Planning and Development and our consultant North Star Planning for our future land use workshop to inform the Comprehensive Plan update. I'm Erin Zwerko. I'm the Director of Planning for the town, and I really appreciate everyone coming out this evening. We really had the series of seasons with these events this fall between pouring rain, nice evenings, and now it's finally cold again. So if you're not familiar with comprehensive planning, a comprehensive plan is a document with a long-range view that guides municipal policy, growth, and investment over the next 10 to 20 years. The planning process incorporates a community's vision and values along with the latest data on topics such as housing, transportation, recreation, economy, historic resources, and fiscal health. Our last comprehensive plan was adopted in 2010, so it's time to move on to an updated document. In September and October, we held community conversations on housing, economy, and natural resources and the environment. Also in October, the Climate Action Task Force held a climate action workshop on the development of the town's first climate action plan. We heard clearly in these workshops that the town will need to work to balance the various priorities from addressing the housing crisis through zoning and other policies to supporting and growing our small business community and protecting important open spaces, recreational facilities, rural spaces, and natural and marine resources. Tonight is the Future Land Use Workshop, and where we will discuss how to translate the vision onto paper. Based on the feedback to date, we want to form a detailed picture of how people will experience different areas of Yarmouth in the future, and that in turn will inform the steering committee with staff and consultant support to identify and put forward goals, strategies, and actions for a future implementation committee to act on. Ben Smith and Kate Birch from North Star Planning will make a short presentation providing background information so you are ready to interact with the stations around the room tonight. We will also have time for a short Q&A session. And unlike the previous community conversations, if you joined us, where we divided into small groups, tonight's program is an open house, allowing you to interact with the stations as much or as little as you desire. But we ask that you try to visit each station to provide your feedback. We also have a short survey that can be completed tonight. Around the room there's a piece of paper with a QR code on it, so snap a photo with your phone. We also have some paper copies if you prefer to fill it out tonight. Finally, thanks to Patriot Insurance for allowing us to hold all these events in their great meeting space. We really appreciate it. And please feel free to grab some pizza, eat some snacks and beverages. And the last thing is that bathrooms, if you need them, are through the back of the room. So I'm going to turn it over to Kate and Ben for the presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. My name's Ben Smith. I'm from North Star Planning. And I've got just a couple slides here before I turn it over to Kate to talk more about what we're going to do tonight. But these next couple slides talk about the process so far. I think Erin had given a pretty good overview of what is a comprehensive plan and why is the town of Yarmouth undertaking an update to the comp plan. Essentially, there's two sections to the comp plan. One is the inventory chapter section that is the existing conditions and kind of looks back at how we got to where we are today. And the next part looks forward, and it makes the plan and lays out some goals and strategies for the future. So we are at the Future Land Use Workshop this evening. The work we're going to do tonight, along with the other input we've received so far, is going to inform the goals and policies and the strategies to accomplish those that are going to be in the plan itself. We expect that the first draft of the plan will be ready for community review in the springtime as we draft goals and policies over the winter. So The future land use plan and map are within that future looking part of the plan. They're going to be hand in glove. Essentially, one is the map that lays out geographically where different types of things are envisioned to happen in the community, and the plan is the narrative that goes with it that describes in more detail some of the finer grained nuances to each of those areas on the map. So they are key components to the plan update, one of the required elements in the state's process. And I often describe it as the town's vision statement on a map. It's essentially taking those values and visions for the future and tying those to the ground, kind of putting those on the map. Essentially, this map is going to inform priorities and document the community's priorities so that town staff, decision makers, elected officials can lean on that going forward. It informs zoning, ordinance changes, and policies going forward. So again, the purpose of tonight's work is to tie all of that input together, start to think about it holistically, to come up with a detailed picture of what different parts of town are going to look like, what they're going to feel like in the future, and what people are going to experience in those places. So there are going to be some places, if you can imagine, where you will envision busyness and activity. And there are going to be places where you can go to find quiet places, or where you can find a restful place in town. There are going to be places in town where you go to socialize and do work, and there are going to be places that you go to play and have fun. So I think that some of those are the kinds of things that we want to start to differentiate, in addition to finding those places where you might do more than one of those things at once. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kate to go through a little bit of what we've heard over the last few sessions that we've had in this room over the last couple months, and then we can talk a little bit more about what we're going to do tonight.
Great, thanks. I'm Kate Birch from North Star Planning. I'm going to give a quick overview of the public engagement we've done so far over the summer and the fall, which includes a summer survey, summer pop-up events, 3 community conversations events this fall, as well as the climate action planning event, which is kind of happening in parallel to this process, but we're working together to incorporate both plans sort of into each other's goals. So the first community conversation we held was on housing. We also talked a lot about housing in the summer survey. And one of the things we asked was, what kind of housing do people think Yarmouth needs to build in the future? What kinds of housing should be built next to change the balance of Yarmouth's housing? And you'll see in this chart, the biggest slice of the pie there is multifamily housing with about 30%, followed by single-family housing, which is 26%, senior and affordable housing, duplexes, and ADUs. And what we really heard through this process is that people do feel that Yarmouth needs more variety of housing types, some more diversity, but people also want to see continued single-family housing development and maybe some diversity within single-family housing types, so different sizes of houses and things like that. We heard a lot about affordability, whether it's a base of a certain percentage of new housing units being affordable, as well as a spectrum of affordability. So not just maybe capital A, deed restricted, low income housing units, but also housing for the workforce, missing middle housing, things like that. And we also heard that any new housing development in Yarmouth needs to be sort of consistent with the town's values and vision and development that is already here. People want to see new housing mostly along major corridors and where development already exists. And people also pointed to the need for connectivity and infrastructure in areas where new housing is developed. And connecting this to what the Climate Action Plan has been talking about is that we can prioritize density around transit and economic centers in order to promote more sustainable communities where people can walk instead of drive and things like that, and the need to balance growth with open space. In our economy questions, both in the community conversation event and in the survey we did, I put the top business types up here that we heard people want to see in Yarmouth. Definitely the top ones are restaurants, whether they're full service or cafes, and recreation, things to do in town. There is a small business focus that's really key to Yarmouth's identity. And people largely want to see these new businesses in areas where there are already businesses, so along Route 1, in the village. But there was also some desire for maybe some smaller restaurants, cafes, retail within residential neighborhoods and on Cousins Island, places like that. And I put some quotes up here just to give an idea of what kinds of things people are saying. So another thing we talked about was municipal action for economic development, which is basically what can Yarmouth do to encourage economic growth. And I'm not going to go through this whole chart, but the big piece of the pie there is incentivize new housing, and I think that's just connecting back to this recognition that Yarmouth needs more diverse housing to meet both the workforce, people who work here, who work at these businesses, and things like that. The other big piece there is improved public transit. People were also interested in supporting the working waterfront. And in relating this back to the climate planning, there's sort of two main things that relate for Yarmouth's economy. One is that as a coastal community, Yarmouth's infrastructure needs to be resilient to the impacts of climate change, sea level rise, things like that, as a kind of big picture item. And then the other way that this sort of connects is that Yarmouth's economic growth can be part of creating more sustainable communities, having, small businesses that people can walk to and things like that. In our environment and natural resource event and in the questions we asked at other events, we talked a lot about places to preserve in Yarmouth. This is a quick chart that shows some of the top answers we got. The Royal River Corridor, an area around that, is very important for environmental quality. People are interested in the recreation potential of the railroad corridor. And in the middle there, you see there's actually a lot of large privately owned parcels that people have identified around town as places that seem like they have a lot of environmental value or a lot of potential for recreation. So we talked also about priorities for the environment and natural resources. Again, I'm not going to go through this whole chart, but the top one is acquire more land for conservation. The next two are about fish passage and water quality. And then the next two are about education for landowners on sustainable practices as well as on the benefits of conservation easements. And I think these are all consistent with the top priorities identified in the Climate Action Planning Workshop, which is good to hear. And I think the Climate Action Planning Workshop talked a little more specifically about goals for land conservation and water quality. And I think connecting back to some of those places to preserve that were identified that are large privately owned parcels, that's where this education piece will come in, because if some of those important places are privately owned, then doing education to landowners and explaining to people the benefits of conservation easements will be important in preserving that land. So I'm going to turn it back over to Ben, but I forgot to mention there are full reports of all of those events on the Plan Yarmouth website if anyone is interested in reading more about what people had to say.
Okay, so back to the future land use map. All of that, I think, goes to say that what we're trying to do is conduct a process that's going to recognize the unique goals and values that have been identified here in town in a way that matches up with the state planning framework that thinks about future land use mapping in three basic components. So what you see up on the screen right now is the future land use map from the current plan, the 2010 plan. And the state requirements talk about growth areas, rural areas, and transition areas. And in a nutshell, the red area in the middle, the large part in the center of town, as well as down at the end of Cousins Island, are growth areas. Those are the places that, by the definition in the state statute, are the places that you want to encourage or incentivize growth. Those are the places you want to put most of your municipal investments in things like utilities and sidewalks. They're the places that you want to see more activity, generally. Rural areas are places that are the opposite side of the coin. The places that you want to protect from the impacts of growth, the places that you want to preserve, and the places that you really want to be very recognizable into the future. So the yellow areas up in the northerly end of town, down by the mouth of the river, and the islands are generally, they're marked here on the map as limited growth. And the transition areas, we don't see any on this map, but those are really the places that are in between. Those are the places that aren't rural, but they're the places that you're not really prioritizing for development and investment in the community. So based on what we heard this summer, we thought it was prudent to come into the workshop tonight with an approach that essentially builds on this map. We want to recognize the work and the input that occurred back in that time frame. And at this point, we're envisioning boundaries between the growth areas and the limited growth or the rural areas being very similar to what they are now. There could very well be some adjustments coming out of the conversations that are going to be happening this evening and with the steering committee over the next couple months. But in general, the way we've interpreted it in the office is that the growth area is the growth area. The limited growth area is generally what the state would classify as rural, or places you want to protect from the impacts of development. You want to preserve the natural character of those places. But there could be some places that aren't really meeting the definition of rural, but particularly down on Princess Point, but certainly not places where you're calling for future growth either. So that might be more closely aligned with the definition of a transition area. So we can have some of those conversations this evening, but I think the takeaway here is that, rather than coming up with scenarios or potential development pictures where we envision a lot of growth on Princess Point or a lot of growth up on Granite, we want to generally keep this pattern of growth around the river and around Main Street and some of the neighborhoods surrounding it, less development and change in the surrounding areas, but really drill down and try and get some more detail on some focus areas in town. The focus areas that match up in the red area on those other maps that we'd love to spend some more time with the community tonight and over the coming weeks are thinking a little bit more about Route 1, thinking a little bit more about Main Street in the Village and some of the neighborhoods that surround the Village area. The other places that we'd like to spend a little time tonight and going forward are thinking about what kinds of growth and change would be appropriate in areas outside of the growth area. Within the growth area, and I talked about that earlier as being the place where you find activity, you incentivize growth, you incentivize development, that's where your municipal investments should be focused. Within those areas, you will find green space and you will find quiet places. And within the rural areas, there are businesses and there will be new housing in those places. So we want to think about in each of these, what is the right balance and in a more fine-grained detail than growth here, no growth here. Think about what does that mean in these more focused areas of the community. So your input tonight on some of the materials we put together will help tell us if we're on the right track with some of these ideas or if we need to make some adjustments. And as I said earlier, going to inform the goals and policies going forward. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kate one last time to walk through the more specifics of the activities here. And Aaron did say we'd have a couple minutes for question and answer while we're all together. And then we'll be available throughout the session the rest of the evening. So thanks.
All right, so we are going to have an open house style workshop tonight, which means that you will all just sort of freely walk around the room and do some activities at your own pace. You don't have to do them in any particular order. You can spend as much time on them as you'd like. No right answers. So the stations you will see around the room, there is one for those focus areas that Ben was talking about. So Route 1, Main Street and the Village, the residential neighborhoods, and a limited growth rural area station. And there will be questions at each of those for you to respond to and kind of react to, say what you like, share your ideas. And there will also be, which I saw some people looking at before we started, there's a table with some conceptual sketches for new types of development. And those are basically just, like I said, conceptual sketches of things that potentially could be built in Yarmouth, and the idea is for you to react to them. These are not based in anything that's gonna happen. These are just ideas. So you can react to them, tell us what you think, and if you like them, you can show us on a map where you might think those types of development belong in town. So I did want to thank the Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee for being here, and also ask everyone to just give a wave so people can see who you are. The Comp Plan Steering Committee will be around the room at the stations to help answer your questions, as will Ben and I, some other North Star people, and Erin and Julie and Scott from the town office. So I think that's everything we need to tell you, so we're happy to take some questions if people have them. Do you have some?
I'm not a property owner.
It is.
Oh, it goes on.
It's the recording, not for the room.
Right.
I'll ask Kate to repeat the question.
Okay. I'm not a property owner on Cousins Island, but I noticed that on one of the points, there was a red growth area there. How will that work in tandem with the climate change issue? How will that work? Building growth, increasing growth in a place where there's sea level rise.
So she asked about the growth area on the tip of Cousins Island, which corresponds to the Wyman Power Station property. So that's why that's there. That I think is zoned industrial because it's Wyman Power Station. I don't know if Erin wants to speak more to the future of Wyman Station.
So it's a good question. I don't think we know the answer. The town, it has lines of communication with Florida Power Light or Nexera or whatever LLC you want to reference. But in any event, I think that goes into thoughts about what might be the future of Wyman Station, right? So it is private property. It is a power station. Energy generation might be a logical use for it in the future. And I think relative to whatever happens there, there should be an acknowledgement of the fact that they might need to plan for sea level rise, especially as it relates to if there's an expanded use of that station for power generation and electricity supply. So I'm not sure, but I think it will be part of the equation. Yeah.
This is really out of curiosity. As part of a comp planning process, do you also look at how much should a town grow? And with growth, there's also the cost of infrastructure, of enlarging the schools, all sorts of other hidden costs as well. And how do you figure out the balance that still makes this town affordable for the people who've been here for years and years, while presumably attractive to people who want to come here. Yeah, that's a just general question. Do you do that kind of equation? Do you do that kind of calculation?
Yeah, the question was about, I think, growth in general, and if I can characterize it, is growth a foregone conclusion or is it good? And if it is, how do you balance that with what we have today in town? For the people who live here today, what is future growth going to mean? I think when you asked that question, I was thinking of the work that we've done on housing market analysis for the town. Camoin Associates and Jeff Levine are both working on the planning process with us. And what they've found is that housing is generally not affordable in Yarmouth. I think if you have a home and you own a home today, it may or may not be affordable. But for someone who's looking to buy a home, the income, even though Yarmouth has a very high median income, one of the highest in the state, it still is ranked at or near the bottom of housing affordability because of, even with high median income, housing prices are so high that it's unaffordable for people in town today, let alone people who are looking to come to town. And that has implications on who will be moving to town in the future. It makes it very tough for what people consider workforce housing, the people who teach in the schools and work at the police station, to find housing in town. And what we found as well, is that I think about 75% of the labor force in town work outside of the community. And they're going to jobs in other places, Portland area, Brunswick, Augusta, and about 75% of the jobs in town are filled by people from outside of town. So every morning, Yarmouth exports workers to other communities, and at the same time, people are coming into Yarmouth to fill the jobs that are in town today. So part of that housing question is connected to jobs. So Jeff, who I'd mentioned, and the folks at Camoin were really looking at what are the constraints and what is the real demand. And, growth is part, I think, of what we're looking at is, being part of a regional labor market and a regional housing market. There's only so much that a local plan and local zoning can do. People will, get jobs in Portland and need to live somewhere. And what we're trying to do is recognize what makes Yarmouth special and maintain those things into the future, while also recognizing that we've heard a lot of feedback about housing unaffordability and where are my kids going to live in town if they wanted to live here in the future. So those are the kinds of things that we're trying to balance, and that goes to what Kate was highlighting earlier about that mix of housing and that kind of thing. So that might be a long way around the barn to answer your question. I'm not sure if I fully did.
I think you are, because sometimes I believe this economic growth ends up making it a lot less affordable for the people who were from there, and their taxes go up and they have to move, and new people come in and it's considered great because the communities maybe like what they had in Boston or wherever.
Yeah,
See,
so
it's that balance. I don't know how you find that balance.
Growth doesn't always pay its own way.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Right.
I guess
I think that's what I'm
yeah.
hearing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that is going to be part of what we're considering and working with the committee on. Are there any other questions about tonight's activities or the things? We're happy to have these conversations with folks around the room as well, but I want to make sure we've got a chance to answer questions about tonight and what we're hoping to get out of it.
Hi, I don't know much about the planning maps, but you noted in the first map that there were state constraints about the rural versus the growth versus the transitional, and we had just the growth and the rural there without the transition, and now it seems on the new map you put just growth or transition. So I'm wondering what happened to the rural, And I'm also wondering if there are still state constraints that you guys have to work towards regarding that.
The one we showed.
Well, so I'll start with this one. This
You're not presenting anymore.
That's Little John Island, by the way. We'll go through my photo album later. This map that is now on the screen is the 2010 comprehensive plan map. That's the current future land use map for the town. And it does block out a growth area, which is that darker area in the middle. It's calling limited growth in the yellow, which is essentially, like I said earlier, the state would call that rural, but I think that there's a distinction being made that rural is not no growth. There can be, and there absolutely will be, some growth and change in those rural parts of the community over the next 10 or 12 years. And there are some no-growth areas in green that are primarily related to environmental constraints associated with the Cousins River and the Royal River, and some of the shoreline areas as well. So this general map is what the town has relied on for zoning and land use ordinances, and I think in general, it's a good recognition of historic development patterns in the community. And I think that's really why the approach we're taking, at least out of the gate tonight, is that we don't want to change this too much. I think that there's certainly room for some discussion around, the edges and some details, but in general, I think growth in the future will probably be where growth has been in the past. And I think it's going to be valuable to think more about what's happening in a more detailed perspective within some of these more focused areas, so that when we talk about a picture on a map, we're going to have hopefully a very detailed, descriptive narrative that goes with this, that is going to provide enough detail for folks like Aaron and other municipal employees and the volunteers in the community, elected officials, that they can really lean on to understand what, at least at this point in time, the values and desires of the community can be. So I think we'll be doing a service for those folks 4 or 5 years from now if we can provide more detail on these kinds of things, rather than just say growth here, no growth there. And that's really what we're trying to build on. I think we've got growth and no growth, or limited growth. And I think this is hopefully the next step that'll make it more valuable going forward. I think we can take a couple more.
Thank you. I had a question about the housing type, the pie chart that was up, it looked like, I don't know what you would call that, like targets for the feedback you received on sort of the distribution or percentage of different types of housing within town. And I guess my question is, and I don't know if you have this information today, but as we talk tonight and think about where certain housing may go in town and growth areas, do we know what the approximate distribution of those housing types are now? So for instance, multifamily makes up a big percentage of that pie chart, but I'm curious what the current percentage of multifamily housing is in town as a percentage of the overall housing.
Yeah, so the Yarmouth currently has about 80% single family detached housing. And then I don't know the breakdown of the rest of the types, but they're all fairly small between apartments, some attached sort of single family like condos or townhomes. Yeah, so I think this chart came out of basically telling people, okay, Yarmouth right now has about 80% single family detached housing. What kind of housing do you want to see built in the future? And we had people say, whether they want to see mostly single family, mostly multifamily, all different things. And we made this chart by basically taking an average of how much everybody wanted to see of each type. So I think I might not have explained it well, but chart wasn't supposed to say that this should be the future distribution of all housing in Yarmouth, but that the new housing that's being built, we want to see a more diverse spread. Instead of 80% single family detached homes, we want to see different types of housing being built in, like, say, the next 10 years.
I was just looking at the map and the central village. It's actually just a cartography then. It shows up as blue like the water, but you've got a different zone for the central historic village. That's all, and it hopefully shows up differently in different maps and has different zone and building code associated with that separate zone. But it doesn't necessarily. It's not blue like the water.
I'm still confused. Is this depicting what is the desired mix down the road would be, or is this depicting the percentage of additional growth in various categories? Is this the incremental growth that we're looking at here?
Yeah,
Because if you're talking about going in single family from 80% to 26%, wow.
No, I think the second thing you said, Ed. So it's the, when people build new housing, we'd like to, or what we've heard from the community is that people would like to see more of that new housing be multifamily. So this would be the new housing, not that this would be the overall distribution in the future. Just that when new housing is built, it would be of more diverse types than just single family homes.
And one additional clarification before we move into the workshop this evening is that this is based on public feedback in the survey and the housing session we had last month. The housing analysis that Camoin and Jeff Levine had completed for the town got into some detail about future demand. And one of the biggest limitations on building new housing is not what the market's demanding. It's the current regulations. It's current zoning is limiting the provision of new housing town more than the market would otherwise build. And I think that it's a fair question to say, is that okay? And, how much should the town be throttling back what an unfettered market would otherwise build in the community? So that's part of what we're looking at too. But this is not the current housing mix, like Kay was saying. This is what people have told us. And again, in an unscientific point of view, what we're taking from this is that people want to see more diverse housing options than the currently are being provided.
Hi, I'm wondering what the sample size is for a lot of your data.
Yeah, this is not statistically, I guess, we haven't done rigorous statistics on this. This is based on survey feedback, which was around 200 people, the number of people who came to the summer pop-ups, which I don't know off the top of my head, and then the people who came to the community conversations events. So it's not a huge sample size. We just kind of took an unscientific average of what everyone said and put it up on the screen.
Good data point, but not science.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, so I think we can let everyone set off around the room, and we're happy to continue to answer questions for people going forward. Just come find one of us. But yeah, feel free to have some food, go around the room in whatever order you want, and have fun.
Everyone kind of agrees is great, but also you create a mix, right? Yeah. Folks are all right. I don't know.